Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Open University.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, Ahmedabad. Today again we are going to continue the previous session which we had already taken last time. That was about the critical criticism, Aristotle's Poetics, and as being the part of that criticism, today we are going to focus on the comparison of Aristotle and Plato both. So let us start our session today. We are in the course of Master of English program, semester 2, paper number 5. Your paper number 5 is about criticism, and we are going to discuss today the block number 2. So let us start the comparison of Aristotle's Poetics, and in that particular Aristotle's Poetics we have to compare today Aristotle's theory and Plato together. Look, this is our session, Classical Criticism, paper number 5, Aristotle's Poetics. So we are going to discuss block 2. Very first one is about the concept of Aristotle, his life, his works, his ideas, oral tradition. He strongly believed that the classification like upper class, middle class must be removed, and there should be the equalization in the society. The classification like ruling class, ruled one should not exist. His concept about the ideal human being is also genuine and holistic. He promoted the democracy and avoided the communism. Democracy is the safest ruling part, and he had discussed about the revolution and the government. He discussed he promoted the democracy, and he discussed that democracy is natural and it is necessary in the development of society. In a holistic society, the democracy is an initial thing, and he naturally, as he was promoting democracy, so naturally he was against communism, and he believed that there should not be any differentiation between the ruling class or the ruled class, but there must be an equalization. These were his ideologies and these were his thoughts. So in that way he had discussed. Now let's go for the PowerPoint presentation that discusses about certain things which were presented in Aristotle's Poetics. First of all, we are going to talk about his ideas, Aristotle's ideas, his concept regarding public welfare, his concept about the theory of democracy, his concept about what to do, how to learn, what is important in education, and what are his ideologies regarding soul and philosophy also, because soul, philosophy, public welfare, all these things go together in humanities. You are the students of humanities, and we need to learn all these things together with a view to Aristotle's Poetics. So let's discuss that thing very first. Let's go for the PowerPoint presentation. Let us start that. Aristotle's ideas regarding public welfare. Look, he is against classification of classes. As I told you, he talked about no hard and fast divisions of classes between the ruling class and ruled one. About education, he said practical education is necessary, as nowadays the National Education Policy 2020 discusses about practical education. This theory which we had been learning right now in 2020 is already had been given in Aristotle's Poetics and in Aristotle's ideology regarding education. He said ideal human being should be an enlightened, prosperous, contented, cooperative citizen. If you need a harmonious society, a better, high quality society, then a person should be enlightened, prosperous, contented, and cooperative citizen. It shows that he discussed over here about holistic temperament and holistic ideology, making living as well as how to live within. So he believed that living, of course, living becomes the part of initial part of human lifestyle, and that is also an integral part of society. Living makes a difference. Look, his views on constitution, Aristotle's views on constitution, his views regarding governance, and he talked about the dictatorship. That is the worst thing he believed. The most desirable form of government is democracy. As I told you in the beginning of this session, he followed democracy. He disliked communism and he destroyed personal responsibility. Common liability leads to individual negligence. Look, he believed that a person, if there is a dictatorship, if there is individualism, and if there is autocracy, then naturally it would become the common liability of an individual human being, and individual human being would be careless, or he would be irresponsible, because it is a general responsibility of whole community. What everybody owns, nobody cares for. Look, Aristotle clearly believed that there should be an equalization and there must be democracy. When Plato empowered republic, or he emphasized republic at the same time, and he believed in communist views, Aristotle stands for democracy. There is an ideology about democracy. He says, in his own words, Aristotle's words are taken over here in this particular quotation. You must mention this quotation in your answer. No sensible man, if he can escape from it, overthrow it, will endure an unjust government. Democracy is the safest ruling form to avoid revolutions in the government and constitution. And dictatorship is crucial and fragile of all. It means that it is crucial in the sense dictatorship becomes a part of incorrigibility. One cannot solve the problems through dictatorship. It is not permanent. Dictatorship may be considered as a short period, it may be considered as a short period of time, rather than democracy is better in compared to this ideology. His 400 volumes regarding human knowledge and human activity. He believed living life as holy and being aware of the impact of the action. Again, he talked over here about living life and how a person leads his life, how he leads his own life. One person, how he takes the life, that is an important thing. He takes life as a wise man, looking the life as holy and being aware of the impact of action. The connection of mind, body and soul, that those the three things, which if those three things are in harmony, then there would be an enlightened personality. Deeper understanding that actions are felt by the body and by the environment as whole one, opens to grow, stretch and learn. Look, all these ideologies suggest us that one should take an action harmoniously. Mind, body and thought, all these three things, they should go together while doing action. Now, as we discussed about Aristotle in the previous slides, look, these three slides, they discuss the ideology of Aristotle. I told you in the beginning that we have to take Plato as well, because he is also an important factor, important part, his role is very much important in his Poetics. His views on the soul, look, I have taken over here to remind you how their ideology differs. Aristotle's views regarding body, mind and soul, and Plato's views on the soul. Soul is a rational thing, soul is spirited, soul is desirous and appetitive. It is easier to imitate the lower or baser parts of the soul. Plato believed strongly that the soul is immortal. Soul never dies. Socrates, his ideology also deals with Plato, and we know that you should know that Socrates was the teacher. He was the teacher of Plato. Plato was his disciple, and Aristotle was a sophomore of Plato. Plato was the teacher of Aristotle. So the tradition goes in that way. First there is Socrates, then there is Plato, and finally there is Aristotle. Here the quotation says, the living have come from the dead no less than the dead from living. So we can understand that the soul moves from one body to another body. This is the movement of the soul. But I think we decided that if this was so, it was a sufficient proof that the souls of the dead must exist in some place from which they are reborn. So Plato strongly believed that the dead human beings, if a soul goes from that dead body, the soul might be remaining somewhere, or there would be a place where many souls together they remain over there, and that is why he believed the concept of birth and rebirth and soul's regeneration. All these ideologies were already presented in the thoughts of Plato. Look, this is the beautiful picture about Plato. He is sitting in front of Socrates' bust. This bust that you can see in the cream color, that is the bust of Socrates, and Plato is meditating on immortality before Socrates. Look, he was completely sure that the soul dies and there isn't anything like immortality. Man is a mortal animal, as Aristotle had given this ideology. In the same way, Plato knew that man dies. There couldn't be any immortality. Still, here we can see that he is trying to do the meditation before Socrates. Look, this is a photo of Aristotle and Plato both. His reply means Aristotle's reply to Plato. He emancipates the value and significance of poetry. According to him, the poetry, it is a systematic exposition of the theory and practice of poetry. So he believed clearly that poetry, according to him, the poetry is a systematic exposition of the theory and practice of poetry. Poetry is an exposition, as Aristotle believed, and he was against Plato also, because Plato's theory was much more regarding didacticism about poetry. Plato believed that poetry should be written only for the sake of gaining the knowledge. Other than Aristotle believed that art should be for the art's sake. So these two different kinds of thoughts. Now clearly what you are going to write in your answers, these are those points. These are, I think, the most important points. This slide, then the next one, the differentiation regarding poetry, and yes, other differentiation regarding poetry. So all these three slides, slide 3, 2, and this is the first slide. All these three slides, they are very much important. These points are very much important. They are the most important integral part of your answer. Look, he is a scientist. Aristotle is a scientist by nature. He moves from real to ideal. He saw poetry with musical element, and he talked about human and human life. Rather than Plato's ideology differentiates over here. Plato contradicts. He had remained a transcendentialist, and he is more about idealism, and he saw poetry with painting. He talked about knowledge. The differentiations regarding poetry. Now you can see that Aristotle about poetry and Plato about poetry. Poetry is useful for man and society, that Aristotle believed, and at the same time poetry is the superficial emotion. Look, it is merely a superficial emotion as per Plato. It hasn't any essential or integral element, or it never talks about any high meritorious thing. That's what he wanted to say. Poetry is the internal emotions and experiences. Aristotle believed that it's an internal emotion. It's the expression of internal emotions and experiences. And Plato believed that poetry is merely the copy of nature. It is merely the reproduction of the things or the images that were seen by the poet. As for example, Wordsworth had seen the beautiful mountains, and then he had represented the same images in his poetry. It is merely a copying of nature. That's what Plato believed. Poetry is imitation of man, copying of man. Plato believed that philosophy is superior to poetry, and poetry should not be given too much importance, but philosophy should be given too much importance as per Plato's theory. However, the men are better verse, romantic, comedy and tragedy, etc. This is what Aristotle believed, that however the men are better, either verse, whatever they write, they may write romantic element, they may write comedy or tragedy, whatever is that, art must be promoted. Over here we can say poetry, Plato says poetry should be only utilitarian and for molding human characters, work of art to living organism. So if a person follows the art, if a person is writing a romantic poetry, or if a person is writing a romantic drama, it must contain the utilitarian purpose. It must contain the didactic element. There must be something like teaching. Didactic in the sense, I think you understand the word didactic. Otherwise, I'll tell you, it means something which is regarding teaching, something that gives us the knowledge. Didactic could be understood with a view to moral understanding also. Something moral purpose must be there behind that art. That is what Plato believed. Aristotle found more systematic and comprehensive, and Plato found that poets are getting divine inspirations, but sometimes the half truth and half imagination is dangerous. So again he believed that though poets were getting strong emotions and imaginations, still it should be cultivated, or it should be improved in such a way, or it should be culminated in such a way, so that there must be the development of human being. It must be utilized for the purpose of learning, teaching, or some intellectual or philosophical purpose only. So he was strongly believing that philosophical purpose is much more important in the understanding of this poetry. Imitation, look, the next point I am talking about, Aristotle. Imitation is a creative process, and reality is transformed into much higher and emotions within its range. So again, Aristotle promoted the imitation. He promoted the theory of mimesis. Mimesis means imitation. To imitate is necessary when a person writes something. If a person is writing a poetry on mountains, Himalayan mountain range, then naturally the poet reproduce the images. So that reproduction itself is imitation. That's what Aristotle says. And over here, Plato believed that the poets can afford no safe guidance. Their frenzy may be non-rational. He believed that poetry is a non-rational, imaginative, dangerous kind of a thing, and it must be stopped. Either it must not be given too much importance, as he believed. Poetry considered to be from the practical and utility point of view, and allegorical interpretations may be cleverer but useless. as Plato believed. So Plato believed that rhetorics or allegorical hyperboles or language of too many jewelry kind of words, too many hyperboles, if they were used in language, then this kind of language or this kind of writing is not too much cleverer thing, but it is merely a useless waste of time. And over here in Aristotle's ideology, we can see that poetry is considered as the practical and utility point of view. Imitation, look, Plato again strongly says that imitation is harmful. Imitation in the sense writing a poetry. If a poet sees some images and that recapturing of images are done in poetry, that is merely a part of imitation, as Plato believed. And Plato says that imitation is harmful. There is no truth, only illusions of reality. The imitation or the poetry, whatever is written in an imaginative form, whatever things are represented, whatever inspirations the poets get and they represented it in poetry, that is merely a kind of illusion and it is not a real thing. Poetry is not a real thing, so it should not be given much more preference, as he said. Now this is the initial part which we are going to learn. Aristotle's Poetics has often been hailed as the most important piece of literature for understanding and writing narrative form. If you want to understand basic story structure, this is the place to start. The important points to remember now, these are the final things which we are going to learn. The basic differences of mimesis as per the Platonic and Aristotelian theory. Mimesis along with the analysis of the epic, tragedy and style is given. Mimesis, I told you, mimesis could be known or could be understood as imitation also. Art of dialogue has two things, oratory and rhetorics. So oratory is also a part of mimesis and imitation, and rhetorics are also a part of poetry. So let's go for the main parts of Aristotle's Poetics. Plato distinguished between mimesis and diegenesis. Look, this mimesis is the speech of a character directly reproduced. If a character speaks, as for example, there is a dialogue of Hamlet and Hamlet delivers his dialogue in a drama. If there is a Shakespearean drama, I am talking about Shakespearean drama Hamlet, and Hamlet speaks his dialogues, that is merely the speech of that character which is directly reproduced. But if sometimes it happens, you might have read in some of the dramas of your BA courses, that if the character does not arrive on the stage, character is not speaking anything, but some of the dialogue, some of the writings were merely written by the dramatist himself, and those writings were merely a narration of doings and sayings, where the poet does not speak, where the writer speaks or the poet speaks, but the character does not speak. The poet speaks in his own person and does not try to turn our attention in another direction by pretending that someone else is speaking. Thus, drama has mimesis and epic has diegenesis. So, diegenesis is merely a description that is written in the beginning part of the drama, or the description which is written in epic or in novels. You know that there are dialogues also in novels and dramas, but the dramas, novels and dialogues are concerned with mimesis. So let's go for the end part. Plato is not happy with the idea of grief. Look, he believed that grief also must be removed, and grief is not a genuine thing. Grief is related with catharsis and purgation that I had told you in the previous lecture. He believed that the temporary catharsis could infect the audience so strongly that they could become emotionally uncontrollable. It seems very illogical actually, but still Plato believed that, and he was a great philosopher, so we had to accept it. As for example, if suicide is presented in the cinema and the person is too much impressed by that suicide, and he or she, the audience, if one of the persons from the audience, they commit the suicide at their home, then it's a dangerous thing. That's what he wanted to say. Plato wanted to say that audience could become uncontrollable due to certain extra powerful emotional representations, while Aristotle believed art imitated the nature. Art is merely the copying of nature. Whatever happens in society, whatever happens in nature, whatever happens naturally, that is represented artistically. That's what Aristotle believed. He believes that mimesis is not mere copying. Aristotle believed that mimesis is not merely copying, but he said that poetry is a higher truth, and the work of art must contain the limitation of the audience spectacles. Thus, he proposed the unity of action, place, and time. Three unities. Aristotle discussed three unities of time, place, and action in his Poetics, that which we are going to learn afterwards when we shall discuss the topic of tragic drama or tragedy, or you will read it in your books. At that time you will come to understand the theory of how he represented the unity of action, place, and time. Now this is the final part. Plato and Aristotle, they are the integral points to understand in the classical criticism, paper number 5, unit about classical criticism and introduction part of criticism. And then there occurs, after a discussion about classical criticism, then there is a discussion about Aristotle and his ideology and his other works, that which we had already taken in the previous session. Then we shall discuss about Aristotle and Plato together and their ideologies regarding poetry, because they are mostly in the examination there are genuine questions regarding Aristotle and Plato's theory regarding poetry. And then finally we need to learn the 6 important factors of poetics: the plot construction, the character, theme, diction, music, and spectacle. So finally, these are the final points. The Poetics was penned in 335 BC. It is a short treatise of 26 chapters and 45 pages, and deeply focused on tragedy, epic, and catharsis. These are the 3 main points: tragedy, epic, and catharsis. Then what are the things which were ignored in Aristotle's Poetics? If it comes in MCQ, choice-based system, multiple choice based questions, there you should write that lyrical poetry, narrative poetry, comedy, descriptive poetry, nature poetry, all these points are merely ignored, merely they were kept out, they were not discussed in Aristotle's Poetics. And the Poetics is thought provoking, means it gives many new ideas, new concepts, and intellectual achievement of Hellenic literature. The best intellectual achievement, I believe, that is his Poetics. And the style of Poetics is telegraphic and highly concentrated. So all these things you should have to remember. And finally we are ending over here. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot. God bless you.
स्वाध्यायः परमं